Hello everyone, here we go again. This is what else I saw in February that I didn't already talk about. Movie number 1 is 1996's Mission Impossible, the first entry in the prolific film series starring Tom Cruise based on the old TV show. I'd never watched any of these movies before, but when I saw they'd been added to Prime recently, I decided to at least check out the first one. It was very fast-paced, very exciting, nice and loud. I had forgotten this was a Brian De Palma film, but I detected his fingerprints in the stylization and one split-focus shot. For all the movie's flashiness and special effects and gadgetry, the most impressive shot to me was one of a speeding train, where the camera appears to be racing alongside this train and then fixes on a point and zooms in to show us what's going on in a particular cabin. Compared to some of the wilder effects in this movie, this shot is relatively simple, but I thought it was really cool. The film makes some gutsy moves as far as the cast and the narrative go, but I found the plot became pretty confusing. At a certain point, I lost track of what had really happened, what the main character knew, what we'd been told before, and that introduced a feeling of detachment which kept me from enjoying the story 100%. I think my parents had the same issue, and I get the feeling they're not inclined to watch more of these. My mom would probably go for it. She's up for almost anything that I say we're going to watch. Well, that makes me sound like a dictator. I guess I kind of am, as far as entertainment goes. My dad, though, I don't think he was too impressed, and I don't ever try to make him watch anything that he's not interested in. I thought it was fun, though. I've always liked how Danny Elfman played with the original show's theme song. The famous scene where Cruise drops into a room and can't touch the floor is impressive, although, of course, I was expecting it. I got an even bigger kick out of the climactic chase scene, which I was not expecting. And the funny thing about the stunts is that I know, as we all do, that Cruise did and still does a lot of his own stunt work and likes to up the ante, madman that he is. So, as I'm watching, I constantly find myself wondering, so, did he really do that? Was that actually him? What about that? Movie number 2. You may remember that a few months ago I did a mini review of the Western Rio Bravo. Some of you in the comments gave a favorable mention to El Dorado, so I've been keeping an eye out for it, and lo and behold, they added it to Prime recently, so I watched it. So movie number 2 is 1966's El Dorado, the second of 3 movies with similar plots, a storyline that director Howard Hawks and star John Wayne came up with as an emphatic rebuttal to 1952's High Noon. It's a simple concept. A sheriff and a few friends face off against a group of bad guys who outnumber them. And on paper, El Dorado has the same ingredients as Rio Bravo, just mixed up a bit. Which movie you prefer, I suspect, is going to boil down to which cast you like better. Speaking for myself, I'm going to give the edge to this one. In general, I found it a little more enjoyable than Rio Bravo, which had a few moments where I felt it dragged. The 3 leads, John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and James Caan, like their characters, work very well together. The writing and the delivery of the dialogue is on point. Robert Mitchum is great as the woebegone, hungover sheriff. He doesn't cut quite the tragic figure that Dean Martin's alcoholic sheriff was, but I like that this take on the character type was a little more amusing, less dramatic. Dean Martin, I thought, was great in his performance in Rio Bravo, but I thought this was also great. It's just a different way to interpret that type. James Caan almost steals the show, though. His character is a hoot, and it seems like he had a blast, even if he did have to wear an awful hat. He's like a regular guy who got dropped into the Wild West and is trying to roll with it. The supporting cast is good as well, including 2 strong leading ladies in Charlene Holt and Michelle Carey, Arthur Honeycutt, and Christopher George, who plays ambiguous but likable gunman Nels McLeod. I found him to be a scene stealer. Now, Rio Bravo does have that impromptu jam session, which is really special, and it has great teamwork in the finale, but El Dorado has the bell tower shootout, a hilariously explosive shotgun, and a lot of witty lines and funny incidents. So, I definitely lean toward this one. Movie number 3 is kind of a viewer recommendation in that a few years ago, when I talked about the book it was based on, The Interrupted Journey by John G. Fuller, one of you said something positive about the movie, and I took that as a recommendation. It's 1975's The UFO Incident. James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons star as Barney and Betty Hill, a couple who had a strange experience following the sighting of a UFO in New Hampshire in 1961. Following a period of mounting anxiety, they decided to undergo hypnosis to try to cure their apparent double amnesia. I was impressed with the film, which dramatizes the sessions and the events of that night as they're recalled. The movie puts as much emphasis on the Hills' relationship as it does on the revelation of what supposedly happened to them, and I approved of that, as that is part of their story and helped demonstrate how credible they are. Both James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons give it their all, and I was astonished not just with how they threw themselves into their performances, but how closely certain scenes resembled the book's transcription of the hypnosis tapes and the startling audio recordings themselves, which I have listened to in part. It's an eerie story that goes in some surprising directions, yet remains, in my opinion, inconclusive. The script doesn't try to resolve the case, it just presents the story as is, and I appreciate that, for the most part, it's done without embellishment. These are real people who had some kind of experience that disturbed and distressed them and changed their lives forever, and the movie doesn't turn around and make them ridiculous. I don't know what I believe about what happened, but it's fascinating to ponder. The UFO Incident was made for TV, as was movie number 4, 2001's The Lost Battalion. The film is set near the end of World War I and stars Rick Schroeder as the leader of an American battalion ordered into the Argonne Forest to advance the Allied line. They fight to hold their position while German forces surround them. I do not have a lot of enthusiasm for World War I movies, or Vietnam movies, or Civil War movies, or pretty much any kind of war movie that isn't World War II. So I kind of kept pushing this off. But I thought it turned out to be really good. I did expect it to be depressing and dreary and bleak, because most depictions of the Great War are, with good reason, and it was depressing to a certain extent, to a large extent, but it wasn't just trench warfare and no man's land and soldiers freezing in mud and muck. It featured good combat sequences, a tense scenario, and very likable characters. Plus, it's a true story. Maybe it appealed to me because it had more of a World War II feel when it came to both battle scene choreography and character interactions. There's an emphasis on soldiers coming from different parts of the country. A laid-back Southerner is given command of a bunch of hardened New Yorkers, many of them immigrants or children of immigrants, and there's a culture clash, yet they all see themselves as Americans and gradually become brothers in arms. There was also one scene I found quite moving, where the Major, played by Schroeder, kneels beside a dying soldier who's clutching a Bible in his hands. The young man asks him to read from it, but the pages are soaked in his blood, completely illegible. The Major pauses, and we wonder what he's going to do, and then he begins to recite a passage from memory, not the 23rd Psalm or the Lord's Prayer or something you'd expect, and this brings peace and comfort to the boy in his final moments. I loved this little scene, and on top of everything else, this was the icing on the cake. Seems like the wrong phrase to use, but it's what pushed the movie over the edge for me. I think it's a good one. I had low expectations, but I really liked it. Movie number 5 is another viewer recommendation, although I didn't remember that when I first added it to our watch list. 1940's The Westerner. Gary Cooper and Walter Brennan star in this mini-epic, Brennan playing Wild West legend Judge Roy Bean, who runs the law his own way, as Cooper learns when he's accused of stealing a horse and brought before Bean's kangaroo court. William Wyler directed this film, with Greg Toland in charge of the photography, and as soon as I read those names in the main titles, my expectations went through the roof. I expected something big and special. And in a way, this was. The Westerner boasts solid performances, noticeably long takes, grungy but appealing images, and a high-stakes story about a vicious dispute between homesteaders and cattle ranchers, which builds to a tragic and visually stunning incident and a climactic showdown. I feel it lacked something, though. The questionable, we'll call it a frenemyship, that forms between Cooper's stranger and the judge is the focal point of the film, and it is very entertaining. But I think it led to some tonal dissonance, because Brennan and Cooper's performances are so effortlessly light and winsome. There were so many parts that were goofy that the movie seemed to declare itself a comedy, but other parts were so dark and heavy that those comical moments then became almost inappropriate. It was kind of like two different films woven together, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. There can absolutely be comedy in a tragedy, and tragedy in a comedy, and you can have a drama that has both. But, I don't know, it just seemed to me that there was something missing here. Movie number 6 is 1945's Escape in the Desert. This reimagining of 1934's The Petrified Forest gets a wartime update, swapping out Leslie Howard's hitchhiking pacifist for Philip Dorn's Dutch fighter pilot en route to the Pacific. He's not much like Howard's character at all, but other elements of the story are more or less the same. The other big change is that instead of Bogart's career-making appearance as gangster Duke Mantee, you've got 4 escaped German POWs descending on a pokey motel and gas station and taking hostages. The result is an alright movie. I find Philip Dorn nice enough, though not particularly dynamic or exciting. They could have done a better job making me care about the romantic plotline, and I couldn't tell if I was supposed to like Gene Sullivan's heroine or not. I didn't. But I did like Alan Hale's hearty dentist, and the father was a decent character. Plus, 2 of the bad guys are played by Helmut Dantin and Kurt Kruger, and while there's nothing remotely sympathetic or appealing about either of their characters, they are monsters. Those 2 actors, so often typecast, are almost always a pleasure to watch. Movie number 7 is Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, the 1979 sequel to the 72 classic, which I've reviewed, directed and produced by Irwin Allen. Picking up immediately after the events of the first film, the crew of a salvage boat, captained by Michael Caine, arrive at the Poseidon looking for treasure and discover survivors instead. For the longest time, I had no interest in seeing this movie. I didn't see why it needed to exist. Who asked for a sequel to the Poseidon Adventure? And I never heard anything good said about it. But it made an appearance on the TCM app last month, and I know that it's kind of a rare film, can be a little difficult to find, so I capitulated. One can't help comparing the 2 films, and when you do, obviously the first one is superior. But I have to say that this wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. You have to accept that it's kind of absurd. Once you do that, then it's entertaining enough. In a way, it's quite different from its predecessor, but it also follows similar story beats and has similar character types, similar sets, similar conflicts, and similar obstacles. It also boasts a huge cast, Caine leading, with Sally Field and Carl Malden making up the rest of his crew, along with Telly Savalas, Peter Boyle, Shirley Jones, Jack Warden, Shirley Knight, Slim Pickens, Mark Harmon, and Angela Cartwright. The actors are fine, and everybody does a good job, more or less. Some people are more likable than others, some characters are better developed than others. I think it's the script that tends to let them down. That's where the movie falters the most, whether it's mediocre dialogue, weak or annoying characterizations, or just the fact that the storyline takes a farcical turn. Like I said, I think you need to be in the right mindset to watch this. If you're open to the idea of a Poseidon Adventure sequel and you know what you're getting into, it can be sufficiently fun. It has its moments, it even has a couple good dramatic scenes. But it is what it is. I also particularly missed John Williams' magnificent score, although Jerry Fielding's music is an interesting alternative. Movie number 8 is one I've had on my watch list for a few years now, 1970's The Other Man, which stars Joan Hackett, Roy Finnis, and Arthur Hill. Hackett plays a married woman who gets involved with Finnis, a smooth operator who changes her flat tire and then starts showing up everywhere she goes. But what starts out as a soapy romantic drama fortunately takes a turn halfway through, moving us into the thriller genre. I don't know if I liked this one or not. I think not. There were just too many things that were To begin with, there's the infidelity. She's neglected by her ambitious lawyer husband, Arthur Hill, but that doesn't make it okay, and he's not an unlikable guy. She's a hypocrite, jealously demanding that her lover prove he hasn't been with another woman when he or she is being unfaithful. The character is also a milquetoast, so not an interesting protagonist, and she's kind of dumb. So, all of this makes it hard to feel sympathy for her, or to feel really invested in her story. I'm betting that the only place you can find this movie is on YouTube, and while I'm grateful that I was able to watch it, the quality is pretty bad, with a magenta hue, audio glitches, and dark scenes where you can't make out a thing. On top of that, the film itself has some oddities, namely this editing quirk where they spliced in random images from flashbacks, and it's like subliminal messaging. It's very bizarre. I thought that something was wrong with the video the first couple times this happened. It was strange. I'll grant that this has an interesting mystery, and Roy Finnis is relatively charming here, and it has you constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it wasn't a tremendously satisfying film. Movie number 9 is 1948's Kiss the Blood Off My Hands. What a title, right? Stylistically, this is a noir, but it's more a suspenseful thriller with dramatic undertones and a strong romantic component. Burt Lancaster plays a troubled young man who gets into a fight and accidentally kills someone. Desperately searching for a hideout from the London police, he breaks into an apartment belonging to a single woman, played by Joan Fontaine. But that's just the beginning, and I won't say more because part of the interest came from the story not going where I thought it would. Initially, the lurid title and unusual pairing of Lancaster and Fontaine made me raise an eyebrow, but the actors actually work very well together. They each give exceptional performances, as does co-star Robert Newton as a troublemaker who witnessed Lancaster's crime. The film looks lovely, it's got great cinematography, and I liked the story. I also found Lancaster more appealing than I usually do. He projects more vulnerability here than in most of his other roles, less Burt Lancaster-ness. I don't typically warm to him as a romantic figure, but this worked, unlikely as the love story may have seemed. I really enjoyed this one. Movie number 10 is a viewer recommendation, 2021's Brain Freeze. It's a French-Canadian horror comedy in which a new fertilizer meant to keep grass green year-round at an exclusive golf club contaminates the local water supply and turns residents into flesh-eating zombies. The story focuses on a teenage boy trying to survive with his baby sister. This one was alright. It could have been better, but it did a few things that were fun. These zombies are the fast-changing, fast-moving variety, and I liked the green eyes, green teeth, green tongue look. That was different. And the grass thing was a new twist. The baby was excellent, not just cute, but very expressive and responsive. I don't know how they got her to do just what they needed in each scene. As for its being a comedy, it wasn't uproariously funny, but I did exhale through my nose a little harder than usual a few times. On the other hand, it makes some odd choices that made me say, what's up with that? There was some stuff that was probably supposed to look cool, but I thought was cheesy, and like so many horror movies these days, it's loaded with social commentary. Some of what it was saying was very obvious. some of it was more murky, or it was a little bit, tricky, I guess I would say, because its point isn't immediately clear. Is it mocking rich people, preppers, health nuts, the younger generation, older folks, liberals, conservatives? It's a little bit all over the place, which gave it this let's hate on everybody vibe. So my takeaway is that it intended to mock everyone, but predominantly rich people, just like all the other movies these days that are mocking rich people and basically saying that they deserve to have bad things happen to them. Like I said, this movie was okay, not super special on the zombie front, but wacky enough to be entertaining, despite some rough spots. Movie number 11 is 1950's Hunt the Man Down, a crime drama that stars Gig Young as a public defender. He's given the case of a man on trial for a 10-year-old murder, but tracking down witnesses proves difficult. This one's not flashy, but it's decent. The defendant, named Richard Kincaid, is a compelling character, very well played, I thought, by James Anderson. Fun fact, another co-star in this movie is his older sister, Mary Anderson. I thought the defendant's plight was similar to that of Dr. Richard Kimball in The Fugitive, right down to the similarities in their names, Richard K. Heck, they both even have a one-armed man. Young's attorney drags his father, a former cop, out of retirement to help him dig up witnesses, and that's a fun angle. Another neat touch has to do with the witnesses themselves, and the surprising contrast in how they look in flashback material versus present day. This was an interesting film, part mystery, part dramatic procedural, and I enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I did nod off on it, but that had nothing to do with the quality of the movie itself. My parents wouldn't let me hear the end of this. They both stayed wide awake through the whole thing, while my head was bobbing all over the place. But I did enjoy the movie, even if my body was telling me to go to sleep. Movie number 12 is also one that I kept nodding off on. Again, nothing to do with the quality of the movie itself. I was just tired. Movie number 12 is a viewer recommendation, 1933's The Secret of the Blue Room. This Universal pre-code thriller stars Lionel Atwill, Gloria Stewart, and Paul Lucas, and was directed by Kurt Newman. Stirred by a chilling tale of a cursed room in Lionel Atwill's castle, his daughter's 3 competitive suitors challenge each other to each spend a night alone in the room to see if they can survive. This was a fair, locked-room mystery. It's short, but it has nice atmosphere and a great setting. It starts to get a bit slow in the middle, but it revives itself with a solid, albeit comically sped-up, climactic chase sequence and a surprising twist. Edward Arnold makes a good appearance as a police inspector, and I enjoyed the bits of comic relief provided by Elizabeth Patterson's cook. And that's what else I saw last month. I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out the description for a full list of the movies and where I watched them, and go ahead and share your thoughts on any of the films that I talked about, or any of the films that you saw last month that you'd like to share, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.